All right, so this is going to be a little bit different today. We're going to go through this coding activity just to kind of really get into the details with methods and how they work, as well as other classes, objects, how to call, parameters versus arguments, all of that. So take a look at this code. This is a code that is going to print averages. So the goal here is that you're able to calculate and then print the average of whatever three ints that we put into the program. So take a look. There are 7 errors that I have intentionally put in here to do that. So first of all, pause the video, see if you can find any of those errors, and as many as you can. Just notice there is also an average class that we are going to play around with towards the end of this video, so that we can call and calculate an average from a different class than just the main class that we've got going on. So once again, pause the video, see if you can find any of those errors, and then we're going to go through it, and we're going to go through it pretty painfully slow so that we understand exactly what's happening as Java tries to run this program. Okay, so to start out, I'm not going to pay attention to any of the errors. I'm just going to go through the code and do what we need to. So whenever Java starts running a program, it's always looking for the main method. So it's going to jump to whichever class has that main method, and it's going to start there. So the very first line of code that Java is going to run in this entire program is line 17. It says, okay, this is my main method. Let's go on to line 18. Line 18 is going to run, and it's going to say average av equals new average. So what does this do in terms of the program and in terms of what's happening? So this is what this is going to do is it's going to create an object that is called av, right? If we think of scanner, scan equals new scanner. Scan is our variable name. Av is our variable name here. So it's going to create an object that is an average object called av, and then we can use av later on in this main class if we'd like to. All right, so it's going to do that. Java says, okay, then we're going to move down to line 19. This hopefully is pretty easy to tell what's going to happen. It's going to create some int variable named x, and it's going to assign it the value of 5, okay, or initialize the value at 5. Once again, same thing pretty much here, only it's going to make the variable y equal to 7 and then equal to 22. All right, so then Java's going to get to this line 22, and this is where everything's going to start going haywire here. So there is a mistake here in this line of code. Hopefully you can figure it out. And it's going to be right here. So the way that we call a method, which is what this is, right? We've got the method title here. So in order to call a method that's in the same class, we don't need to associate with an object. If I'm trying to call a method from another class, then I need to know where that object is coming from. So for right now, I'm going to delete that as my first mistake. Currently, I have averages, x, y, z, which at this point, it's going to take, and it's going to say, okay, so you want to call this method averages with x, y, and z. And it's going to get to that parenthesis, and it's going to stop running this line of code. So line 22 is going to stop right there before we get to the semicolon. It's actually going to go right to after the parenthesis as well. But before we get to that semicolon, and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to jump to the method named averages, which means that this code is going to jump from line 22 all the way to line 24. And the first important thing to remember is that the things inside this parenthesis, we call those arguments. Those are the arguments we're passing through. And the things in this parenthesis are called parameters. Let me just extend this out a little bit. There we go. Are called parameters. So what's important to know is that when we call a method, the arguments in data type have to match the arguments in parameters. So notice the parameters of this method takes an int and then an int, and then an int, which means in our arguments, they have to be an int, and then an int, and then an int. Good news, x, y, and z are all ints. There's three of them. We're good to go. So now we've started up until this point, haven't quite finished line 22 yet, but we're jumping to line 24. So here it's going to say, okay, I've got averages. This method is going to return an int data type, and I'm going to use these three parameters that we're involving. Ask yourself real quick, what is the value of A right now? What is the value of B, and what is the value of C? So A is going to be 5, B is going to be 7, and C is going to be 22. It matches up the first argument with the first parameter. So it's going to send whatever is in X, and it's going to send that to A. Same thing for Y is going to be sent to B, and Z is going to be sent to C. So those are going to be 5, 7, 22. All right, perfect. So after line 24, Java is going to move down and run line 25, where it's going to create an int average value, which is equal to 0. Then that's going to move down to line 26. And this is where it's going to get a little bit crazy. Okay? So it's going to say, okay, average, I know what that is. That is a int variable. Cool. So, okay, now we're setting a value. Okay, we're setting something into it. And it's going to call sums ABC. And I use the analogy here that when I call a method, it's no different than calling a pizza place, calling up Domino's. Hey, I need to order a pizza. You tell it exactly what you want inside that pizza, right? I want cheese, I want pepperoni, and I want sausage on the pizza. And then what do you do after you call and order a pizza? Your next step is to actually go to the Domino's and pick it up, assuming you're not doing delivery. So anytime we do a method call, the same thing's going to happen. I'm going to call sums, and I'm going to stop running this line of code. So I'm not going to finish running line 26. In fact, I'm going to get to the end of that parenthesis, and it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to jump to sums, which means it's going to run this much line of code, and it's going to jump to line 29. Once again, we have to make sure that we match up our parameters and our arguments. So real quick, what is B, C, and A? What are their values right now? So pause the video, think about it, maybe write it out. All right, so this B value is going to be 5. Because remember, the very first thing here is going to get sent here. The very first thing here is going to get sent to the B value right there, and so on. Now notice that when I create this variable here, int A, it's only alive within the brackets that it's created. So that means this A is only recognized from lines 24 to 28. So when I start this code here, this is now not in lines 24 to 28. So Java's like, oh, cool. There is no int B that exists yet. So yeah, let's do it. So just so you know, this is a very poor way to write code, as well as this whole program is, but we're going through it. So we have our values here. Okay, that's cool. And then we are going to move down to line 30, which is going to run sum equals 0. So it's going to create that sum. Then we're going to move down to this line of code 31. And this line of code, remember what it looks like is exactly like sum equals sum plus A. So those two lines of code are identical. And what this is going to do is it's going to look up here, what's our A value? Our A value is 22. And so it's going to add it to sum. So sum is currently now at a value of 22. So I'm just going to write that here just so we can keep track of that. Sum now equals 22. All right, we're going to now run this value. Actually, that's probably a bad place to put it. Sum equals 22. Okay, now we're going to add this code. And once again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add that B value to our sum. And remember, this B value right now is set at 5. So we're going to add 22 plus 5 and then assign that value to our sum. So sum is now going to be equal to 27. And then we're going to do the same thing here, add that C value, which is 7. So that sum is now equal to 34. All right. And so now the plan here is to return sums. Okay. And we have an error on this line, line 34. So see if that was one of the errors you caught. And remember that here we have to return a variable. So we have to return sum. We can't return a method name. So if I try to return sums, it's not going to work. I have to make sure that I return sum. We do have to make sure that our data type int matches our variable, which it does, so that we're able to return sum and we're good to go. So essentially now this line of code is no longer seen in Java. In fact, this line of code now in Java reads average equals 34 divided by totals. And we'll get to that part in just a second. So when we're doing this, remember, so we run sums, we run the entire method from bracket to bracket. And when I get to line 35, that's when we're going to jump back up here to line 26 and be like, okay, I now know what this is. It's 34. And now we can continue with this. All right, so we're going to read, Java's read this much of the code so far. And we're going to keep going and get to totals. And so we're like, oh, okay, I'm calling another method here. So we're going to run all the way to this parenthesis. But before I get to the semicolon, we're going to stop. And Java's going to jump down to line 36. Now we got some issues going on here. So if you notice, we want to make sure that our arguments match our parameter. Currently, I have 3 arguments. They're all ints, so int A, int B, and int C. But my parameters, there's nothing there. So if I'm going to call totals, I have to make sure there's nothing there. Or I need to make sure they at least match the arguments here. So there's 2 ways we can change it. We can either add 3 ints down here, or we can remove the ABC down here. What do you think is going to be best for this method and for this class so far? And that's going to be to remove A, B, and C here. And the reason I say that is just because we don't use any ints down here. So there's no reason that we need to send that information into totals. All right, so we're calling totals. We're down here, we're in line 36. After it runs line 36, it's going to get to line 37. We're going to get an error. So what this is trying to do is it's trying to do essentially count equals count plus 1. The problem here is that if I'm trying to add 1, if I'm trying to increment something, I got to have a starting value, right? What is count set at right now? I have no idea. So first of all, it doesn't even know what count is. It doesn't know that it's an int. So I need to create int count. And that's not enough just to do this, right? Because I still don't know what I'm incrementing it to. So I need to set a value. And in this case, it's going to make sense to set that value equal to 0. Perfect. Now that I have int count equals 0, now I can add 1 to it, and my count will become 1. Same thing here. I'm just going to increment it by 1, so that count now becomes 2. And here I'm going to increment it so count becomes 3. Then I get down to line 41. And 41 says, okay, let's return our count variable. Our count is an int. We're returning an int in the method, so that's great. So then I need to take this number count, and I'm going to return that information up into this method call up here. So once again, Java doesn't see totals anymore. Java changes that 34 and turns it into 3. So we've reached the end of the method, which means we jump way back here, which we've gotten almost completed, but we haven't done the semicolon. So now after running totals and after turning totals into 3, we get to the semicolon and Java's like, okay, now let's assign that value to average. So average will become 11, which as we know so far in the lessons, 11 isn't what we want for the average of those 3 numbers. We would like an answer of 11.33333333. But currently Java is just doing 11, which means once again, we have to make a change. We made an error and we have to fix it. So in this case, we don't want average to be an int. We want it to be a double. So I'm going to switch this to double so that it now reads that average equals a decimal place. So if I just make that change, this is actually going to end up being 11.0 because once again, it's doing integer division, 34 divided by 3, which is 11, and then assigning that to a double and being like, oh, now I need to add a decimal, so we'll do 11.0. So we can do this a couple different ways. We can turn either sum or count into a double and return that, but it's going to be much easier just to add in here 1.0 times sums, because now it's like, oh, now we're doing 1.0 times 34 divided by 3. I see that we have a decimal, so everything's going to be a decimal. And this is now going to return 11.33333, repeating. So average now is currently at 11.333, which is what we want. So now it's going to jump to, now that we actually finished this line of code with the semicolon, it's going to jump down here, and it's going to return average. So remember that we were down here, and we were almost done with here, but now we have just finished this method call, and so it's going to attempt to return that. But once again, we're going to get an error. Remember, your return type has to match what you're returning. But average is a double currently, and this method says we're going to return an int. So we need to make sure that we change that to double as well so that it returns the right information. All right, so now this, Java kind of gets rid of that, and now we'll turn that into 11.33333, repeating and so on. So we have finally gotten through our method here, and we've been able to calculate an average now correctly, fix most of the errors. And so now it should print out, or that's what we hope. So I'm going to, since we didn't use this average class yet, I'm going to comment that out, and I'm going to run this program. And our hope is that we're now going to see 11.333 repeating. When I run the program, we see it run, and we see it just stop. So it runs the whole program, and it just stops, and it doesn't do anything. So yeah, we calculated this correctly, but we actually didn't print it out. So don't forget that we always have to do our system.out.println and print out that averages. And now as I print this, we will see the 11.33 repeating printout. Perfect. That's exactly what we hope to see. So that's just a little bit about methods, method calls, making sure that your arguments match your parameters, and kind of how Java runs and sees this program. Now I kind of want to get into this average class as well. If I look into it real quick, this isn't necessarily important, but you'll see that average can take 3 parameters. And that in order to calculate an average, we're going to call the method doIt. So I'm going to come back here, and we're going to change this to 5, 7, and 22, which is going to be our arguments that we'll send to match our parameters. And then we're going to calculate AV, and we want to make sure that we just we do it. So let me put that semicolon there. We'll call doIt. Don't forget that when we use a method, you always need to put the parentheses there. When I run this code, we're going to have an issue here. And if I look at the error message, it says Java can't find this method anywhere. So remember, if you have a method call, Java's going to look towards this class to see where it is. So it says, okay, I've got the, nope, that's not doIt. Let's look here. Nope, that's not doIt. So let's look at this next one. Nope, that's not doIt. Let's look at this next one. Oh, nope, that's not doIt. Oh, there is no doIt method here, so I can't do it. So remember, if we're trying to call a method from another class, that's why we create an object. So that's when I'm going to need to say av.doIt, and then it's going to be like, oh, av is an average, so let me go to the average class and be like, oh, yep, here it is. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do now. I'm supposed to calculate that average. So now when I calculate it, we're not going to get an error, and in fact, we're going to get the same as before. So once again, don't forget that you need to system.out.println method so that it actually prints out onto your screen. And now we can see that we get the same answer. Matches perfectly. Real quick, just a couple things that we can play around with here is, let's not do that yet. So if we do here and I do system.out.println, just the object. So I'm not even going to call the method. I'm just going to call the object. What do you expect to print out here? We expect the 11.33 repeating to print out. Well, so do I. So let's find out if that happens. Whoa, okay, when I called the object in line 20 here, we ended up getting a whole sentence. The average is 11.333. How does Java know that that's what I want to print out? Well, there's a specific method that's going to do that anytime you print an object. It's going to be a very important method that you're going to write and kind of override a lot. And that method is called our toString method. So the public string-to-string method is going to return whatever you want this to do. So in this case, I calculated the average correctly, but then I wanted to return the sentence the average is, and then whatever it is. So notice that toString method plays a part when you're trying to just print an object. And then also just a little bit here of information. I have two constructors here, one that takes 3 ints and one that takes 4 ints. So as far as this goes, this is called overloading the method, right? We can have different ways of calling this method. So if I wanted to calculate the average, I could put another number here, let's say 30, and then that's going to also work. Java knows which one I'm doing based on matching up arguments and parameters. So if I said 4 arguments here, then it's going to go to the constructor where there is 4 parameters. So notice it now calculates my average. We're good to go with that. Now I've only set up possibilities for 3 and 4. If I try to do another one, right, we're going to run into an error. If it runs, it will run into an error. And the reason is because now Java can't find this, so it doesn't know what to do. Okay, let me rerun that. Yeah, so we got an error, right? It says there isn't a constructor in order to do this, right? It says this constructor with 3 ints is not applicable. This constructor with 4 ints is not applicable, so we don't have a good constructor. And notice it also matters the type of information we send, right? If I send this as 5.1, okay, that's now a double value, not an int value. So we're also going to run into the same issues right here. It's going to say incompatible type, right? It expected to have an int, but instead we sent it a double. So we got to make sure that we're careful when we do that and send it through. So hopefully going through this code a little bit, really painfully slow, clears some things up, and you can kind of understand this whole chapter 2 a little bit better because of it.